defense witness called out of order to utilize the interpreter that has been brought into the court. There were a couple prosecution witnesses that used the interpreter before this witness. He's laying out that it was his idea for a knife to be brought on this journey. So he called his friend, who's known for 10 years, Nick Mew, bring your knife, because it'll help us when we tie these tubes together. And then he just told the jury why Nick was away from the rest of the group. He was looking for a missing phone. And that's what we had heard. He told investigators right away. So he's looking for this phone that's in this pouch with his scuba gear and knife. Michael Jaafar watching along with us. How important is this witness for the defense?
Highly important. Anytime that your best friend has the ability to testify, in your case and say how good of a person you are, how much of a Boy Scout you were, and oh, by the way, the weapon that was used for the murder was not his fault. I told him to bring it, and he brought it for a good reason. I mean, this whole thing is lining up, Ted. This whole thing is lining up for the defense. I mean, this has reasonable doubt screaming all over it. So I think this is an excellent witness. You can't have a better witness as a defendant who used a knife in a murder than this witness saying exactly what this witness is saying.
What about the language situation? The defendant speaks 5 languages. English is his 5th. This friend of 10 years obviously does not speak English well enough to the point where he doesn't need an interpreter, and he's speaking Spanish, and Mew is Romanian. And he's an engineer. He's an intelligent individual that does seem to be way down on the list of murder suspects, given other, facts. How does that factor in?
You said something earlier I didn't think about till you said it, and I fully agree with it, which is that if you speak a million languages, and English is your last of the 5th languages that you speak, it's bound to have play a role in you misunderstanding a teenage gang and not knowing whether or not they are being nefarious towards you, whether or not they're being aggressive to you. You brought that up. I agree with you, and I think that's absolutely going to be in the closing argument of the defense attorneys, which is, look, he spoke 5 languages. English was the last of his 5th. If I tell you, go eat cake, you'll interpret it one way. A person who doesn't speak English might interpret that a different way. He must have interpreted and might have interpreted some of the things they said as antagonistic. That does not show that he had any intent to do anything aggressive.
Yeah, anyway, it explains that look on his face when they're going back and forth, that he's not saying anything, he's just kind of there, and then he finds himself in the water. It's a fascinating case, it sure is. We'll get a break here. We'll get you back into the courtroom for more testimony from this friend of the defendant right after this. All right, the friend, Ernesto, longtime friend of the defendant, telling the jury his story, and it is quite compelling. Michael Jaafar watching along with us. What stands out?
The defense attorney got away with a couple of leading questions in there that helped his client. I think what stands out is the fact that this guy is coming off as sincere. He's testifying on behalf of his best friend. I mean, I cannot understate the significance of it. And he's testifying to the fact that the murder weapon that was brought to the scene was brought by his recommendation and for a good, non-nefarious purpose. That's big. That's big. So what I take away from this is all good. I can't wait for the cross-examination. I can't imagine what the cross-examination is going to be because of the fact that the defendant himself is a Boy Scout, right? He's an engineer with no criminal record. So I don't know how this is going to be a very difficult cross-examination for the prosecution. That's all I'll say. Very difficult.
The witness seems very sure of himself. He is succinct in his answers, but also very forceful. We'll get a break, and to your point, cross will be difficult. We'll see how the state handles that. We'll check in with Michael Jaafar here before we hit a break, and then we'll get in for the cross-examination. The overall effect of a person like this telling the defendant's story out of order, how helpful is that? It's the interpreter's availability, but at the end of the day, now jurors have sort of this other story in the back of their minds.
It's so disorienting, Ted. I was just thinking the same thing. It's so disorienting. If you're a prosecutor, right, you try hundreds, sometimes thousands of cases. You're not used to a defense witness, and the worst type of defense witness for a prosecutor possible, right in the middle of your case, right in the middle of your case. Now you got to get back on court. You got to cross-examine him. By the way, cross-examination is not the same thing as direct examination. I know everybody knows that, but what I mean by that is the muscle memory needed is different, right? And so the defense is used to doing cross-examination for the first half of the trial when the prosecution's on, and the prosecution is accustomed to doing cross-examination in the second half of the trial. To do it out of order, it's very disorienting. And on top of that, this witness just basically went in there and said, my best friend is a Boy Scout. He would never do this. He was saying in Spanish, nunca, right? He was yelling it. He would never do this. I mean, this is a really good day for the defense.
So if you are crossing this individual, what are you attempting to do to mitigate the potential damage to your case?
The case in chief, if I was a prosecution, the case in chief is what happened on the river, not what happened before the river. Were you there? No. Did you see what happened? No. Did you talk? Did you try to stop it? No. Did you find out? So, and then in their closing statement, next week, they'll say, look, discard everything he said because he was just talking about his friend. Good people do bad things. There's always a time when you become a murderer. When you become a murderer, before you become a murderer, you were not a murderer, right? So that would be my whole entire facade. I would just go at it. Listen, there's a first time for everything. You don't wake up. You're not born a murderer. You become a murderer. He became a murderer on this day with these kids. Look at their family. Look at this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what I would do.
Yeah, and I would say you told him to bring a knife. Are you aware that he told investigators that he stole that knife from one of the other kids and he lied? Your Boy Scout friend lied. Do you know that, sir? Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they go about it. Michael Jaafar, as always, thank you. Enjoy your weekend.